Live from the Talking Joe studios, it's Talking Joe.
G.I. Joe, the very best, Americas Elite. Eliter than all the rest, trained to have no flaws. Defending liberty across the land, valor oversized. Bring out that big brass band, real heroes verified. Gotta read them all, you must agree. Elitist in history, G.I. Joe, oh there could be no end. In a world we must defend, G.I. Joe, gotta read them all. A courageous crew, their colors red, white and blue. Mess with them and they'll shoot you. G.I. Joe, gotta read them all. Gotta read them all. Yeah.
Hey, it's me, Mark, and welcome to Talking Joe, the G.I. Joe Comics podcast. If you're new to the show, you can find out all of the details over at the website, which is talkingjoe.co.uk. Now, today we are back once again, like a Renegade Master, with Talking Joe Disavowed, as we continue our look at the Devil's Due era of G.I. Joe. And we are concluding our deep dive into the G.I. Joe Americas Elite era with issues 33 through to 36, released by Devil's Due March 2008 through to June 2008. And this marks the final 4 chapters of the 12-part World War III saga, and also the final chapters of the entirety of Devil's Due's G.I. Joe publishing output. For those reading along in collected editions, this is collected in the 2008 Americas Elite Trade Paperback Volume 5 from Devil's Due, which was the World War III Omnibus, collecting all 12 issues of this particular arc, or in the 2014 trade paperbacks from IDW. Volume 6 collects the final 6 issues of the 12-parter. Now, without any further ado, here's my co-host. It's a real American Tim. It's Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners.
Hey, Tim. Excited to be delving into this last part of World War III?
Yes, and a little sad because final issues always make me a little sad because they always bring me back to G.I. Joe 155 and Transformers 80. Those were 2 important comics in my early comics reading history. And whereas the Transformers TV cartoon, it does have a final episode, the show was already sort of fizzling out because that final season is only 3 episodes. And G.I. Joe, the TV show, sort of disappeared differently because it went away, came back for the movie, came back, was only okay, didn't stick around too long. But Transformers 80, G.I. Joe 155, even Special Missions 28, they tell you that they're the final issue, and they do something different. And Devil's Due certainly knew the end was coming and planned a big story before they knew it was totally their end. And so there's sort of a double meaning here to the end of this, because it is the end of this big story, and as you said, the end of everything G.I. Joe that Devil's Due publishes, minus that omnibus, so the final issue is cover dated June 2008.
The omnibus came out like the next week or the next month because Devil's Due had lost the license, so they were told that they could only collect this all in one go as an omnibus, so that's why they did the 12 issues rather than splitting it up into slimmer volumes, and it's why the omnibus came quite so soon, hot on the heels of the actual last issue itself.
Yeah, the website I'm looking at has the cover dates for the final issue, June, and the omnibus for July. But I do remember sort of even then knowing or sensing that it was, as you say, just 2 weeks or 3 weeks, right after. So I'm very much thinking of what it means to have an ending in G.I. Joe, how this ending is different than Marvel's ending, and how Devil's Due fans, which I have never really been one, felt at the time, and when they look back at this arc and this final issue, how they feel. And reading this issue, I was feeling a lot of sympathy for people who really love the Devil's Due era, particularly those who like it more than, say, the Marvel era or the later Marvel era or the IDW era, that losing your favorite comic is just no fun. And these are some good G.I. Joe comics. And while they're not my favorite comics, I'm just thinking sort of sympathetically to the Joe fans out there who might be listening to this podcast, who in 2008 were really bummed that Devil's Due didn't get a renewal on its license.
Yeah, and just thinking about the end of this era and sort of going into the next IDW era, the cover date for G.I. Joe issue 0, which was the first G.I. Joe from IDW, was dated October 2008, and that compares to the last issue here, June 2008. So I don't have a strong memory at the time about how I felt about the transition between the properties or my knowledge of them. I would have been plugged in enough into the community to know that the issue 0 was coming, because I do remember that I got it at the time. I see that contemporary reporting from January 2008 reported that Devil's Due had lost the license, and the official press release for IDW landing the G.I. Joe license was from May the 29th. So it would have been known at this point where the license was going to go. And some of the details to IDW's G.I. Joe issue 0 were announced at San Diego in July 2008. So it's possible that not a huge amount was known still at this point.
I've also come around a little bit when I joined Talking Joe, and immediately we reviewed issue 1 of Devil's Due's G.I. Joe from 2001.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well as being the end of an era of Devil's Due reading, it's a bit of an end of an era for us as well, because we did start this journey together all the way back in February 2021.
Yeah, you asked me to join so we could start talking about the then new issues of A Real American Hero, and we picked up with 276, but you also wanted to start from the beginning of the Devil's Due run, and so co-host Jay Cordray joined us for those episodes for the first big batch. So we were alternating, and at the time, I didn't love issue 1. In 2001, I didn't love issue 1 of Devil's Due G.I. Joe. And rereading it, I didn't love it. And I sure had a lot to say about it. And in reading all of these comics and interviewing many of the people on this show who made them, and, meeting some in person at conventions since then, I guess particularly Josh Blaylock, my harsh take on Devil's Due, this sort of overprotective, how dare you? You didn't make G.I. Joe the way I wanted you to. Why isn't Larry Hama doing more of this, doing all of this? Don't mix in the cartoon, just follow the Marvel continuity. Don't start other, continuities like Sigma 6 or Reloaded. Just focus on the main one. But peeling the curtain back and learning specifically the challenges that went into making this comic. Hasbro at the time had certain rules for G.I. Joe, and at the very beginning, Josh Blaylock was flying by the seat of his pants, right? He knew what he was doing, but he was young and he was sort of by himself and then assembling a very small team. And so rather than, sort of crossing my arms and hunching over and frowning and thinking, this is the lesser G.I. Joe, how dare you? Reading World War III in particular, these last couple of Talking Joe episodes, and being aware that, even before you said it 2 Talking Joe Disavowed episodes ago, that this is a lot of people's favorite Devil's Due G.I. Joe. I was aware that this was a lot of people's favorite Devil's Due G.I. Joe. And so I've been trying to look at it more from that point of view and less, grumpy Tim from all the way back to 2001, who, didn't read past the first year of the book. But what does this mean to a G.I. Joe fan with a different set of priorities? And what about this G.I. Joe comic speaks to other strengths and portrayals of G.I. Joe? And so with sort of a different set of glasses on, I'm able to enjoy this arc and these final 4 chapters quite a lot.
Great stuff. Let's dig into it, shall we? So these issues were brought to us by a team that we recognise from the last couple of episodes. Script, Mark Powers. Pencils, Mike Baer, with Mike Shoyket and Patt Quinn. A slightly more even distribution of work this time round across these issues. Colours, again, from Jean-Francois Beaulieu. Letters, Crank. Military advisor, Phil Kost. And the editor, a.k.a. Grand Admiral Poobah, Mike O'Sullivan.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
Okay, so the cover to 33 is drawn by Robert Atkins and colored by Jean-Francois Beaulieu, and with Mike O'Sullivan. I'm not sure if that's like reference help or if he's inking, some of the guys in the back. But this is what I would expect if the book is having a hard time keeping to a deadline, or if the accelerated pace of the final year or even final 6 months of Devil's Due, if they have to produce 12 issues in fewer than 12 months, then yes, they're going to bring in additional artists to help Mike Baer. And it follows then that he's not going to do the covers because that takes a lot of time. Or the covers need to be done earlier because they have to go through, more approvals, or they have to get sent to the distributors who are going to put them into catalogs, right?
And certainly if they're as ambitious as this cover and cover to 25, which, by the way, listening back to Mike O'Sullivan, Mike had originally wanted that cover to be done by Arthur Adams, but wasn't able to make that happen. So yeah, if it's as ambitious as this one, which to a degree is like a companion piece of a Cobra lineup versus the Joe lineup on 25, an artist like Mike Baer, who's clearly battling deadlines to get these issues out, he's not going to be able to do something as involved as this on top.
Right. Okay, so whereas the cover to 25 was all of the Joes slightly favoring the left in front of the Capitol and pretty small because there were over 200 of them, the cover here to 33 is every Cobra ever, not Alley Vipers and Secto Vipers and, Cobra Vipers, not troopers, but any individual, right? So Crocmaster, Cesspool, Cobra Commander. So it is every Cobra, and they are sort of bigger in the image or closer because there are half as many, and so you can get them closer, but also because none of this image is going to be covered up by the logo, right? 25 was the kickoff to the story, but that had a logo in its sort of normal placement for a wraparound cover. Here, 33 follows the cover layout for the remaining chapters of the story, where there's a black horizontal bar on the front and a much bigger one on the front and back on the bottom, so that the image doesn't have to compete with any of the text. And all these characters are sort of more straight on. We're not looking at them sort of off to the left. And interestingly, this includes characters who are dead, like Wraith. This includes characters who are unconscious, like Zaymot, within the story. This includes characters who have had sort of almost no appearances, like the who are those three brothers from 94, 95?
The Payne brothers.
The DePayne brothers, all three of them. They show up for a couple of pages in 95, and I can't even remember if they make it to page 96, issue 96 back in Marvel. And they do get referenced in the, data disc profiles earlier in this story. But here they are drawn head and shoulders as if they are going concern characters, and they never got toys, and they have never shown up in any other, even obscure G.I. Joe story, toy pack-in comic, text story backup. This is a fun image, and notably the Plague, this team of 13 all black, dark gray, sort of elevated Cobra troopers, they get the third row behind, the most known Cobra characters, Cobra Commander, Firefly, Serpentor, Destro. So that's a fun cover. 34 is also Robert Atkins, and this one is colored by Wes Zioba. So now we're back to not wraparound, just a front cover. This is Baroness and Destro sort of in battle in some smoky rubble ruins. He's leaning against a shot-up wall, and she's sort of lunging and shooting. They each have... he has 2 Uzis, and she has 2 pistols. This is a little overcolored for my tastes, even though seemingly there's not a lot going on in terms of color. I think there are more highlights on these characters than my preference. This one had a New York Comic-Con variant, which was limited to 250 copies. This is Drew Johnson, Ray Snyder, and Jean-Francois Beaulieu. And this is also Destro and the Baroness, but they are... What are they doing? Are they climbing over a...
I think they're stood on a glass roof, maybe?
Oh, no, a window. We're in a building looking out the window. Baroness has just planted a bomb on the glass that's on the bottom. There are 8 seconds left. She has her original action figure machine gun sort of slung over her. Destro is mid-air behind her, and he has both a pistol and also he's firing 2 wrist rockets. And then there are 2 helicopters and a giant moon behind them, creating a lot of light, spotlights and moonlight on them. And then in the distance are some buildings at nighttime. This is a fun image, but I don't quite understand the sort of physical logic of it. I feel like either they should have rope climbing gear or cat burglar, like little claws and suction cups and glass cutting tools. I can't quite tell if these helicopters are trying to stop them or sort of how they got there and how they're getting away. But, the series is ending in 3 issues, so it doesn't really matter. The cover to 35. This one is penciled and colored by Mike Baer. So interesting that, he can squeeze in the time to do a cover while he's seemingly rushing to draw a lot of pages for all these issues. This one is Colton and Cobra Commander rushing at each other, both with their fists drawn. The ground below them is actually Earth, sort of the curvature of Earth, and sort of they're running on the continental U.S. You can see a little bit of Florida on the bottom right, and then Louisiana and sort of Texas in the middle and on the left. And then behind them is a mushroom cloud, which is informing the lighting. So they are backlit. They've got some yellow highlights on their edges. The mushroom cloud sort of has a core of white and yellow, and then it goes to red, and then sort of a darker red. This cover ends up being inadvertently kind of a rainbow. I don't say that as a joke. I'm just sort of observing sort of, a spectrum range of color, because there is red, yellow, blue, green, from the fire to the core of the explosion to the green ground to the blue water. And the sort of green of Colton and the blue of Cobra Commander become, in effect, non-colors. They're so washed out and gray.
And the cover to 35 with this nuclear cloud was one that Sam Wells called out was one that suffered from Hasbro editing. They, I think, originally had guns in their hands, and this was edited to not have guns in their hands.
Yeah, this is something that Devil's Due had to deal with in the 2000s. This is something that Marvel had to deal with in the mid to late 80s. And, you know, it all comes down to one or two or three people at Hasbro making the call, and they might be reacting to sort of, you know, the general state of the world and recent news. It may just be a personal preference. Certainly they're doing it to, you know, protect and enhance the brand. It does feel a little incongruous because, you know, the toys come with guns. So Hasbro, if you don't want them to have guns, why are you making these toys? And I think, as the theme song goes, they are fighting for freedom. 36 is a real treat. One of my criticisms of Devil's Due from the beginning was that, minus J. Scott Campbell and Mike Zack, the talent wasn't A, up to snuff, and B, they weren't alluding to G.I. Joe's rich creative history. I wanted more artists who had worked on G.I. Joe, and partly because that's an instant approval. Well, if they worked on G.I. Joe, they're good enough to work on G.I. Joe, so they can work on G.I. Joe. And, you know, people aren't available, or, you know, if you drew G.I. Joe in 1991, you might not want to draw G.I. Joe in 2003. You might be busy, or it's like, well, I've done that already. And, you know, Devil's Due didn't have a lot of money, at least not at the beginning. So to have Michael Golden draw the cover to 36, and it is a wraparound cover, although, again, it's got a thin vertical black bar on the top and a thick one on the bottom. So it is a wraparound cover, but it's sort of 2/3 size. And this cover is notable for several reasons. One, did I mention it's Michael Golden? And just about everything he draws is impeccable and gorgeous, right? He gets all the technical stuff, weapons, equipment, gear, swords, grappling, climbing gear, tanks. He gets them perfectly. His style is this sort of, no one in comics drew like him before this, although certainly some people try to draw like him after. He's mixing some cartoony exaggeration with also a full knowledge of anatomy, acting, poses, and technique, right? His actual drawing of clothing folds and cheekbones and sort of the bottoms of noses and rocks and stone and metal and lightning bolts. It's all just amazing, right? Few people just draw in a raw talent way as well as Golden. Okay, so here, this cover is pencils only. It is not inked. It still looks great, but if you look in close, all those sort of areas of solid black, you know, minus Snake Eyes, you know, if you look at the sort of shadows on Roadblock's arm, you know, there's sort of a scratchiness to them. It still looks great because his penciling is so tight, but it is not as polished as almost any other Michael Golden image you have seen up to this point. And roughly around the time, he was also doing some covers for Nightwing where he was penciling, inking, and coloring. So there's a contrast. So I'm going to chalk this up to probably budget, maybe time.
We actually have a clip from Mike O'Sullivan that I can cut in here, talking a little bit about the process around this particular cover. And because it was Michael Golden requested that it be in pencil, in part because he was looking at the sort of aesthetics of the rest of the covers up to this point in the arc, and seeing that they were also in pencil. So it was apparently a Michael Golden decision to not ink this one.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask, how did you get Michael Golden for America's Elite 36? And is there a story with the fact that the cover is pencils only?
It's what he wanted to do.
Okay.
I got Michael Golden by approaching him at a comic convention in Chicago, and I basically just gushed over him. I told him, you know, I'm an old school Joe fan. I've been a fan for years. I mean, those yearbook stories and covers that he drew. I mean, good Lord, are those incredible. And so I told him that I wanted him back for a special cover, and that I was also getting Herb Trimp to do a special cover for Joe 36, and that it would mean the world to me to wrap up this story with the legacy of Joe artists, the cream of the crop. I laid it on thick. I did, but he was great. He was, and that was, for me, that was a lot of fun to get a Joe cover from him. I wish that we could have done solid inks on it. I think it would have paid off a little bit better, but it at least matches the rest of the cover for that run for the World War III story.
I'm guessing a lot of readers didn't pick up on this, and I think I have a good eye for that. So if any listeners are like, wait, the cover's not inked, then yes, I'm guessing, and Mike O'Sullivan is confirming.
Yes, it is not inked, and he wanted to do that. And so, because he looked at our other covers and he saw that, most of our other covers are not inked too. If you look very carefully, you can see some loose pencil sketches, pencil lines in the covers for this run.
So Mark, was Blaylock saying last week to us that Golden had to rework the cover a little bit? Am I remembering this correctly?
I think there was feedback about weapons on the front cover, and there was a request from Hasbro that there was some changes.
Yep.
I'm sure Golden loved that.
He had to go back to Golden, and Golden maybe wasn't too happy about being asked to make changes.
Well, luckily, I learned my lesson from the Adam Hughes, and I got sketches for everything. I was doing that I was doing that beforehand, but with a big name artist, especially Adam Hughes, I trusted that Hasbro knew what they were going to get, and I was a little intimidated by it was Adam Hughes, and I didn't want to go to him and be like, "Can you do a sketch for me? Because I have to get it approved first." And I got burned bad. So at that point, it didn't matter who the artist was, whether it was a big name or not. I was getting the sketch. And so things could be reworked before it got to a stage where they had invested so much time and energy into art that they would be furious if they had to change it. I did it with Herb Trimp. I did it with Michael Golden, you name it, because I did not want to have that Adam Hughes experience again.
Presumably a Michael Golden sketch is pretty good on its own. It's probably a little smaller and a little looser than finished pencils.
Yeah.
But, if you squint, I bet some people out there would say, run that as the cover.
Yeah. I wish I had kept it. I wish I had. I don't have the digital file for it anymore, but I wish I could see it, because it would be great to. Because the guy is just a phenomenal talent. You go back and look at anything he's done, and it's just him. Arthur Adams. I tried very hard to get Arthur Adams to do a cover. Boy, did I work hard. He was who I had in mind at first for this.
And he was unavailable, uninterested.
Never heard back.
Huh.
I tried every avenue that I could. I was getting in touch with Marvel people that Mark Powers knew from his time at Marvel, and I could never get Arthur Adams to respond. Alex Ross got back to me and said he just doesn't have any interest in doing anything G.I. Joe. So that was a bummer. I was bummed about that.
Well, that's a good reminder and a good correction. So thank you for playing that clip, Mark. This cover is also colored not by Michael Golden, who seemingly after, 1990, I can't think of projects or covers where other people are coloring Golden. When I think of all of his Marvel covers after a certain point and his, occasional interior pages, he is coloring his own work. And this goes back early. He didn't color all of his issues of the Nom, but he did color issue number 1. This cover is colored by Jean-Francois Beaulieu, so it does match the aesthetic of the interiors. And Beaulieu does a really nice job mixing in some texture into all of these fields of color, right? So, the complexion on Scarlet, the green of the tank, there is some visual noise or static, as if he, scanned in like a crumpled up piece of paper or photographs of gravel, just something to break up a flat field of color. The exception being, the pure white of Storm Shadow's hood and Scarlet's star. Okay, so the cover itself, in terms of composition, the covers so far for World War III are either every Joe and every Cobra standing there, or action. Characters fighting and grappling and shooting and blasting. And this cover is more like a movie poster montage of heads and bodies. So a couple of these Joes, Storm Shadow and Wild Bill, are big. A couple of them are sort of medium, CoverGirl and Roadblock, and then a couple are small, Duke and Flint on the tank. And some of them have guns, many of them don't. And it took me a long time to realize this, but it's a bunch of Joes and a Mobat, and the background is red, and they're aiming slightly to the right. So this cover indirectly refers back to the cover to Marvel issue number 1. Even if they're not all on the tank, in front of the tank, running at you and blasting at you.
Very good. And this cover was another one that suffered from the Hasbro No Guns edict. The request was from Hasbro that they rework the montage to be less of a gun-heavy composition. Some guns are okay, but it should be more iconic, non-aiming. So what we have got in the final image is no shipwreck firing. He's instead got some rope. No spirits pointing a gun. No Wild Bill with his 6 shooters. No Flint with his shotgun. No Duke with his gun. Roadblock is no longer firing his gun. Gung Ho doesn't have his gun on display any longer. Snake Eyes, we can't see his gun and it's not pointing at us. And we can no longer see Stalker's gun. So I'm counting on my fingers as we went along. 9 fewer guns or fewer guns shooting. So a lot less gun heavy than the original cover was.
Another way to say it is that in the original, Storm Shadow has his sword, and in the final, Storm Shadow has his sword. In the original, everyone else has a gun. And half them are firing. And also the tank is firing. And then in the final, the tank is not firing.
Right, yeah. There's that. Yes, I think my count should have been at 11 because there's also the tank and Scarlet. So yeah.
So in the original, you get the sense that the tank is driving ahead because you can see under both sets of tracks that it's sort of grinding up the ground, and you really lose that in the published composition because a few characters get moved around, and the wheels of the tank on the back cover are colored pretty dark. 36 had a retailer incentive cover. This is drawn by Herb Trimpe. Do you know who colors this, Mark?
Wes Zioba.
Okay, so this is an homage to Marvel 155, the final issue back then, which was drawn by Phil Gozier. This is the same composition, but now a different lineup of Joes. It's the active roster from Americas Elite, including Sparks, who's been sort of active. And this time, the 2 Joes who are folding the American flag are Hawk, seated in his wheelchair, and Colton. And the coloring is much more modern. There's a lot of rendering, and the sort of darks to lights are higher contrast, whereas the cover to the original 155 was, 1994 flat colors. And I was not aware of this cover at the time, but certainly this would have gotten a nod of approval from me in all of my 2008 Devil's Due grumpiness because, hey, they paid Herb Trimpe to do something G.I. Joe. Grumpy 2008 Tim probably would have said, a little late.
The famous Easter egg on this particular cover is that they have pasted in Quick Kick underneath, just above the R of America on America's Elite, such that his eyes are peeking out of the helicopter. So they include him as a bit as fun because he originally appeared erroneously on the cover to 155 because in the continuity at that point, he was dead.
I just want to point out that Trimpe draws a really particular gung-ho face here. And then there is there's a third cover for issue 36, and I'm just going to talk about it for a moment, but then you should run with it, Mark, because you know more about this. This cover, rather than saying G.I. Joe Americas Elite 36, it says G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, number 235. So they have counted up all of the Devil's Due, G.I. Joe, and America's Elite issues and added that to the 155 numbering. And then across a banner over the G.I. Joe logo type, it says Devil's Due Publishing and has a corner box. So what it's doing is it's looking back to the 1980s, the early 1980s Marvel trade dress. And this cover is a particular character saluting with some floating heads around it, which is a cover design we sometimes see. Which John Byrne did this for Fantastic Four, and then were there some variants right at the end of the IDW looking ahead? Like didn't
Yeah, John Royal did a similar sort of thing with some a main figure and floating heads towards the back end.
$2.99 or so at IDW. Okay, so Mark, tell us about this particular cover.
This was a bit of a team effort. The main figure, interestingly enough, was drawn by Mark Powers and inked by Mike O'Sullivan. The heads were drawn by Mike O'Sullivan, and the little guy in the corner, which is an homage to kind of that grunt figure in the original run, is actually meant to be Josh Blaylock as a Joe, and I understand that Mike O'Sullivan also drew that one, although Sam Wells had credited Mike Baer as doing that particular figure. And this is potentially the rarest G.I. Joe comic that there is. Somewhere between 10 and 20 copies left from an original batch of 50, most of which were damaged or destroyed, and just given to Devil's Due staff at a staff party, which never happened. So just a few made it into the hands of Devil's Due people before the remaining copies were damaged by flooding and fire. Recently, Devil's Due assistant publisher Sam Wells sold a graded copy. It's a 9.8 graded copy on eBay, and it got up to a nice little value for him. And I've got a clip of Mike O'Sullivan describing this cover, so I'll play that here.
We did a special cover that was just 50 copies of this cover for G.I. Joe 36, America's Elite 36. We printed 50 copies, and it was meant to just be a gift to Devil's Due, friends and family. I took 10 copies, gave them to all of the creators of the issue, and then somehow the box that was at the Devil's Due office got destroyed. So there are only like 10 to 12 copies of this comic in existence. And last night as I was gathering my stuff for this, somehow I have 3 of them. I've got one that I kept for me, one that I need to send to Phil Kost, and then somehow I have a third copy that I didn't even know I have. So I've got a copy here that, maybe I should sell to the highest bidder. Who knows?
Or donate to your favorite G.I. Joe podcast.
Yeah, exactly. But I've got the original headshots that I drew for, I'm trying to get the right one. So I've got the headshots that I drew. Rob Atkins inked them over my pencils.
And then who drew Colton?
Mark Powers drew Colton.
Wow.
I inked the Colton. Let's see, what else can I tell you about this? I also drew the Josh Blaylock in the upper corner. I built the cover. I did all of the actual graphic design, placing of the heads.
Right. Reworking in Photoshop.
Who colored the cover?
Wes DiZioba did the colors on this one.
Okay. Who had colored a bunch of G.I. Joe for Devil's Due.
Yeah. I think I even colored the figure of Blaylock up in the corner. I think I did the colors on that one. So this was a big jam, and it was neat to ink Mark's figure. I got to do that, and then see my pencils. Anyway, so I've got the pencils for that, which I love.
So last episode we left on a bit of a cliffhanger of Billy, Cobra Commander's son, turning up at the Cobra location. So that is where we pick up the story in
Plot Breakdown.
At Fort Meade, Cobra Commander asks his son Billy to join or die. Billy is locked away but escapes and attempts to kill Cobra Commander. He is not successful and is killed himself by a poisoned dart before being strung up as an example for others of his treachery. Storm Shadow tracks down the Baroness and Destro and cuts a deal. While in Scotland, a Night Raven with Mars cloaking technology is stolen by Barrel Roll, who is in disguise as a Strato Viper. Destro is then able to inspect the technology to figure out just how it can be disarmed. They are able to disable the technology, and Mars equipment starts malfunctioning all around the world. This means that the Joes are able to press forward. The Joe team learns of Cobra Commander's scorched Earth plans to place nuclear warheads in the Amazon and Antarctica. The Joe team is split up, with members going to Brazil, Antarctica, Fort Meade, and London to defeat Cobra. The teams in Antarctica and in Brazil are successful in beating the Cobra forces and disarming the nuclear bombs. Meanwhile, Colton leads a successful retaking of Fort Meade. Cobra Commander's new secret location is the first training ground for Cobra in the Appalachian Mountains. Agent Delta is able to tell the Joes where he thinks the Cobras will go for his final fight. It is the place where it all began for him and where he lost his soul. In London, the Iron Grenadier Army, led by Destro Jr., surrender to Destro Sr. and the Baroness, who now has her own army, called Athena. Alexander is shot in the back by Armada, who is then shot in the back by... Alexander is shot in the back by Armada, and Armada herself is promptly killed by the Baroness. At the final conflict at the Cobra base, Blood is revealed to be Zartan in disguise, who calls in the Dreadnoks for backup. The Stahl brothers, Blackout and Barrel Roll, have a confrontation. Sparks is held at knife point by the real Major Blood, and is rescued by the undercover Joe Viper, who is revealed to be Recondo. And as Cobra Commander makes his escape, Hawk, using Velocity's jetpack, slams into the Commander, knocking him out and capturing him. As we conclude, Cobra Commander is locked away in an undersea prison, and the rest of the Cobras are captured and sent to the coffin. Destro has turned himself into the authorities for his crimes and is currently on trial. The Baroness and their son have disappeared. The President is happy with the outcome, and even though there is lots of rebuilding to do, he is keeping the entire Joe team on full active duty with no red tape and no restrictions. On Staten Island at the Fort Wadsworth Motor Pool, we're back where it all began. Hawk and General Colton are standing in front of the team, and he says, "We are here in the place where it all began so long ago, to ask you this. Are you in? Can we count on you?" And the entire team says, "Yo, Joe." So that was a long plot breakdown, and I left out a lot.
Well, this is 4 issues, and one of them is double-sized.
Uh-huh.
So that's 5 comics worth of plot breakdown. And the Devil's Due run in its entirety has been some dense comics. You know, in the 2000s, not every publisher was fitting, 6, 7, 8 panels per page, and Devil's Due usually did. It's a team book. It's not like the X-Men versus Magneto, where it's a team book and there's one villain. It's a team versus team book, but it's really teams. You have to keep checking in with the Dreadnoks as a team, and the Plague as a team, and the Iron Grenadiers as a team. And like X-Men, it's not just a team that's been around for 3-5 years. It's got hundreds of members, and I think quite reasonably the creatives on this story, even if Bazooka shows up for one panel, Sci-Fi shows up for one panel, they want to squeeze in a lot of characters. And I feel like even calling that Easter egg is inaccurate. Maybe technically that's exactly what an Easter egg is, but I feel like it's sort of a little more story driven than that, because this story is very much about war and conflict breaking out everywhere and the Joes having to go everywhere. And I realized halfway through the story, but I didn't say it in our previous episode on World War III, that what this 12-part represents is the professional comic book narrative version of the kid who gets out every Joe toy and plays a big game. And I had forgotten this while I was reading the comics, but when I was young, my brother and I, would generally have small or medium games, and we would often sort of call it at the beginning, like, oh, do you want to play G.I. Joe? Yeah. And we sort of look at our toys, and one of us might say, like 5 or 6 guys each, like, okay. And that means 5 or 6 Joes, and then, 3 to 10 Cobras. And it's probably going to suggest like 2 vehicles, the Hiss and the Stun, and the Desert Fox and the Snowcat. Sometimes we sort of knew that like our time was short, or a parent had said something like, like we're going out later, so don't make a big mess.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you want to have a small game? Like, oh, just 2 or 3 figures each, and we'll just sort of contain it to the coffee table. And 2 or 3 times my brother said, everyone, we're going to have a big game. And one time it was literally like, let's try to incorporate every figure, even the ones that we sort of don't like anymore, a couple of the older ones that we've decided are sort of valuable and we don't want to touch at all, like my mail-away Steeler. And I think my brother had traded a friend for Snake Eyes version 1, but then traded back. And that's what this is. This is Mark Powers and Mike Baer and others getting every toy off the shelf
And on the floor.
plus a bunch of new ones. Was it Major Mayhem, who's the Iron Grenadier?
General Mayhem, I think, yeah.
General Mayhem, thank you. And these new guys like the Plague Troopers, and then I think technically Colton is sort of a non-player character, because the character here in the comics does not quite represent the anniversary Joe Colton mail-away action figure. So I sort of realized, oh, this is that. And I think the only other time this has happened in G.I. Joe comics, and I think, a few characters get left out, or they're drawn so small you can't see them. So this may not technically be every Joe ever, but, the only other time I think this has happened is when Larry Hama said just before Snake Hunt, and I can't remember if this was his idea or the editor's idea, but, a 10-part story with every living Joe. This comes many years after World War III. So, Mark, what is your big reaction to these final 4 chapters?
Oh, I've got all sorts of thoughts going on in my head. I think the probably the most important one is just an admiration for the scale. I really like this thought process that you've got about it's a big game. You're emptying all of the toy tubs onto the floor, and you're going to play with every single one of them. And yeah, like you say, there's been very little attempted in the comics at that level of scale. That you've kind of had big stories like the invasion of Springfield in issue 50, and the Cobra Civil War, and Devil's Due have done big stories as well, like the second Cobra Civil War and that kind of thing. But nothing quite as big as this. And just to be able to try and take on a story of that scale, and to be as successful as they have done here is quite the feat, and it's difficult to do, and certainly other writers and artists trying to attempt something similar to this aren't always quite as successful, and Harmer himself wasn't quite as successful in Snake Hunt when he last tried to sort of empty the toy tub onto the floor. So definitely admirable ambition, and an appreciation that they were successful as they were.
One more comparison to Snake Hunt. Snake Hunt is 10 chapters. World War III is 12. World War III gets a double-sized issue and kind of another double-sized issue. Snake Hunt, in some ways, is not 10 full issues, because the final one is all splash pages, which was a fun visual experiment, but you can't tell as much story if it's a full page of a couple Joes and Cobras shooting each other up with bullets and swords in a hallway in Springfield. Whereas here in World War III, in 6 panels, you can check in with the whole Destro and Alexandra subplot. And in fact, in 1 page, in 2 pages, you can tie that off. Mm-hmm. Another big top-down reaction for me here is this is all about endings.
Mm-hmm. And resolutions as well.
Yes. And in some ways, I mean, certainly this is the end of America's Elite, right? Colton is in charge, and Hawk is using a wheelchair, and you've got this sort of division of Joe between about 13 active Joes and then every other reserve Joe. And this sort of awareness that it's not the full team, or they don't have full funding, or they don't have the full confidence of the president. So that goes back to America's Elite 0 and 1. But this is also, of course, an ending to the full Devil's Due continuity, which goes back to Devil's Due issue 1. But this also is an ending to the combined Marvel and Devil's Due continuity. And I counted 3 specific references to big things that happened in the Marvel continuity, which characters mention here in Part 9, Part 10, and Part 12. So the Baroness says to Storm Shadow, "I have no qualms about shooting you, as you know." Mm-hmm. And that traces back to, is it issue 30 something at Marvel?
I think it might be later than that, because I think it's around 48, something like that, because she shoots him on the beach on Cobra Island, and then his body is used as part of the soup to make Serpentor.
Okay, thank you. Baroness says to Scarlet, "How's the head?"
That's just mean.
Because we sometimes forget. I will never forget, because this is a bonkers Mark Bright panel. Wait, the Baroness shoots Scarlet in the head?
Yeah.
In issue, in issue 93.
And then she's in a coma, and her sister tries to turn off her life support. Ugh.
Right. And then also here at the end of World War III, Storm Shadow says to Scrap Iron, "This is for the Softmaster." Yeah. And these 3 references don't have footnotes. They don't have asterisks.
And also Storm Shadow and Zartan have a moment too.
Right. That one refers a little bit less specifically to a scene that we can trace to an issue, but yes, absolutely. So yes, there are 4 references. And then, the sort of this final battle between not Colton and Cobra Commander. Colton gets shot, but Hawk and Cobra Commander, this somewhat traces back to issue 1, although, Hawk was never the... there's some X-Men comics where Wolverine sort of takes over, or you have a bunch of new X-Men teams and lineups, and Wolverine manages to show up in all of them because that's going to goose sales, and he's a lot of people's favorite character. Hawk was never the Joe who sort of stands out and gets the spotlight. That's Snake Eyes. And so there aren't a lot of scenes which I can think of from the Marvel run, and maybe there aren't any that I can think of at the moment, which are very much about Hawk and Cobra Commander, as opposite numbers.
There definitely was in the early days of before sort of Duke came onto the mix, and Hawk was more of a frontline leader. I can recall there was that kind of battle between Cobra Commander and Hawk on the back of a HISS tank and stuff like that.
Issue 16 makes the cover.
And but I think the confrontation between them here sort of more specifically calls out the confrontation that Hawk had with Cobra Commander in the Devil's Due era, where Hawk is shot and paralyzed. So being able to take an active role and using that jetpack to actually physically, despite the fact that he is now wheelchair bound, he is still able to sort of take that physical role in the G.I. Joe team and personally take down Cobra Commander, after having been cut down so viscerally in an earlier issue.
Right. So I'm aware of this story in these final 4 chapters, and very much in the final chapter. And again, I want to should not just say that it's double-sized. I'll just remind everyone, I love double-sized comics. Right? Give me a heftier package with more pages, or do a normal issue with no ads. I'll take them all. Destro's story comes to an end. Baroness's story comes to an end. Billy's story comes to an end. The Plague story, somewhat. The Storm Shadow Snake Eyes conflict that's been sort of ebbing and flowing since Devil's Due issue 1 and really since Marvel 155. The Snake Eyes purging his ninja attributes and just being a commando, which remind me, is that the end of the Devil's Due before America's Elite?
That was following his resurrection in the Casey era. He sort of
Okay, that's a year into America's Elite, or 8 issues. Okay, so the Snake Eyes, is he a ninja or is he a commando? Can he be both? That gets a resolution. Sparks not being a full Joe gets a resolution. Hawk, as you just said, using a wheelchair and feeling sorry for himself as he did in earlier issues, or being less capable, that has a resolution. The actual World War III that's going on gets a resolution. The deal that Destro makes so that Cobra has Mars gets a resolution. That there are no longer 12 or 13 active Joes and then a couple hundred Joes who we don't see, that gets a resolution. And as you said in your plot breakdown, some of this resolution involves characters dying. And then also a bunch of characters go to prison. Although it only gets 2 panels, and the art on those 2 panels is good, but it's a little hard to follow who's who. Although you can figure out 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah, there's a couple more on my list of resolution as well. There's the Recondo Major Blood resolution after Recondo was almost killed by Blood back in Special Missions. The President gets his resolution. He's sort of hidden away in a Middle Eastern cave and is rescued by Ray.
That happens earlier in World War III, and then it gets resolved because he gets pulled out and brought back. The
kind of the Della Eden and Red Shadows kind of plot gets a little bit of a resolution in terms of sort of, they've landed in a different place, and the Wilder Vaughn shows up wearing a skull on his outfit, which is a nice little piece of punctuation to something that was missing when he appeared earlier.
Wait! Help out. Is that a reference to the Action Force Red Shadows?
Yes, that's a reference to the Action Force Red Shadows, where their logo was essentially a skull on their uniform, and that was missing. It was a key element of design that was missing from the Devil's Due reinvention. Okay. And the Stool brothers, their rivalry that was introduced in the Brandon Jerwa run a good few years ago in this chronology, sort of comes to a head as a big sort of confrontation between the 2 brothers, between Barrel Roll and Blackout.
So, who dies? In your plot breakdown, you said that Alexander dies, and also Armada, his partner. She kills Alexander,
somehow thinking that would impress Destro.
And then Baroness kills Armada.
Yes.
Does anyone else die in this story?
Oh, they must have done.
Is Max Hauser alive on page 36 of issue 36? There's the final scene where there's Hawk. I think it's Hawk. Maybe it's Colton. There are 3 pages of 6-panel grids where we're checking in each panel with people are back home or people are recovering or the battles have been won. So we see Falcon and Dana sort of embracing, and we see Destro in The Hague. I think he should have had a red shirt, not a white shirt with a red tie, but that's okay. And then in St. Louis, on the 3rd of these 3 pages, we see a man with gray hair and a beard and a sort of aqua t-shirt helping. Oh, you know what? That's not Duke. that's Hawk. Is this a nurse who's just helping Hawk sit in a chair, like in a
maybe
like physical rehabilitation place? Because Max Hauser, Duke's dad, has glasses. Anyway, I don't need to nitpick that one, but actually, for that matter, 2 panels below that in Wisconsin, who are those 2 people who are sitting by a fireplace?
That is Recondo and Sparks.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know whether that's a hint that they're more than just friends or just good friends, but
well, their individual interests and passions seem to be reading books. And man, after saving the world from Cobra, I would love to. Man, after a normal week of doing my jobs, I just want to sit and read and have everyone leave me alone. Okay, so did anyone else die? Oh, who's the flying plague?
The plague. Is he called? Is he that one? Velocity?
Probably. A couple, 2 or 3 of the plague characters are killed, and then there are some references to potential futures. So this would be the opposite of a resolution. This is Devil's Due is not making an issue 37. Devil's Due does not expect IDW, 6 months later, to in any way pick up its continuity. But you can't write a story like this and only have endings. Because, maybe Devil's Due 5 years later, 10 years later, gets the license back. I certainly in 1992, when Dark Horse Comics, which was a relatively small, I think they were like the number 4 publisher in comics in America, and they had licenses. They had Predator and Aliens and Terminator and maybe RoboCop by then, but no, Marvel still had RoboCop. Dark Horse got Star Wars, and Dark Horse made a lot of Star Wars comics for the next 20 years. And, in 1992, and then like 10 years later when they renewed their deal, I certainly didn't think Star Wars would go back to Marvel, because it looked like Dark Horse was doing a much better job than Marvel had done. But you never know, 5, 10, 20 years pass and different people are at different companies, or a company buys a company. And so it is not unreasonable to think that in some future, Devil's Due can make more G.I. Joe stories. And so I do appreciate, and even just giving sort of the fans who have been so invested in the Devil's Due continuity, just giving them a little sense of what could happen, even if it will never get told. So the 2 or 3 or 4 things that look to a potential future. The Baroness is watching Destro's trial at The Hague and holding her baby. And as you just said, Wilder Vaughn rescues, what's her name? Della
Eden.
Della Eden. Moments after she is put in prison, he breaks her out. And then there's the much more general Cobra threat to Hawk on the final page, or maybe the second to last page, that sure, you have locked me up, but this is a movement and the world is still terrible. And so more people will do terrible things like me.
Mm-hmm.
Can't stop it. So am I forgetting any? I'm looking at my page of notes, but it's a lot of dense notes. Am I forgetting any scenes which look ahead to what could come later had Devil's Due continued?
I don't think so. While we're on this theme, I can perhaps play another little clip from Mike O'Sullivan here. He's sort of, because, obviously this is a 12-parter, and it's been dealt with deftly that there is a conclusion with some hints of looking forward, but it isn't necessarily the story that they would have originally told, and that somewhat does colour the results that I think particularly this back half of it does feel a lot more compressed, and I think the desire as they mapped it out originally to about issue 50 was that things would progress at a slightly slower pace, that maybe Cobra would be in the lead for longer and G.I. Joe would be a bit more of a scrappier resistance force over a longer period. As it turned out, Cobra kind of only really were in that dominant position for a fairly short amount of time in these issues before the tide is turned and they're defeated.
This might be a little bit of interest to you guys and to anybody listening. I cannot remember all of the details, and I wish I could. I could not find I've got a book that has all of my G.I. Joe notes, and I couldn't find it in my storage stuff before today. But somewhere I have what we plan to do with America's Elite after World War III, before we lost the license.
Ooh.
And I was trying to pick it out of this quagmire that's in my head, that's my brain, and I couldn't. The only thing that I could remember is that we were going to end World War III with Cobra winning. They were going to win, and they were going to be, they had what they always wanted. They were going to have control of everything. And it was going to be a bunch of stories between then and issue 50, where it was G.I. Joe kind of underground, guerrilla tactics, becoming what they really should have been, or not what they should be, what they really were intended to be, which was not a lot of support, not a lot of technology, just people that were the best at what they do, doing what they do. And high stakes, a little more gritty of, clandestine type stuff, black stealth uniforms, and we were going to keep making the Plague a really big deal. We were going to keep making them, developing them, having them be key villains in helping maintain this global order that Cobra had conquered. And then by issue 50, I think we were going to start breaking that down and having Joe get back to reining Cobra in and whatnot. But I thought that might be a little interesting thing. And when we had lost the license is when we kind of took the brakes off a little bit and decided that, okay, let's have some things be finite. And that's when we decided that we would kill. But yeah, that's where we were going to go with the series after it ended, or after World War III ended. Kind of bummed it didn't get to happen, but neat little footnote.
Maybe that's a mini series. G.I. Joe Forever.
Yeah.
When Marvel does like X Factor Forever.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's get the creators to come back and tell that one more story that they woulda.
God, I would love to.
Okay. In the credits, or on the inside front cover of issue 33, there is a tip of the hat to color artist Stefan Peru, who had passed away then recently, who had done color work on G.I. Joe for Devil's Due and other publishers. I think he did the first Matt Fraction Salvador LaRocca issue of Iron Man, maybe the first two. And then what I also realized, what this story is doing structurally is having the active roster, those core 12 or 13 Joes. At the beginning of the story, they have to go somewhere else. And then they have to make their way back. And similarly, the Plague, which is 13 bad guys, all in black, they start out somewhere else confronting these Joes, and then they make their way back, and there's a bit of a confrontation. And so again, it's not like the original 13 Joes versus some original 13 of Cobra, but it is a core 12 or 13 of Joes now against a new sort of heightened group of 13 Cobras. And so that feels, narratively, you have these opposite numbers. It's like, well, the ninja guy on Plague in the Plague, it's like, I want him to go up against Storm Shadow.
And he does.
And previously, any Joe can use a jetpack, and one or two Joes specifically come with, 3 Joes specifically come with jetpacks. But Stalker, in like a lot of animation, has had a jetpack, and so there's a little bit of this, which Joe is going to go up against a jetpack Plague guy, Stalker.
I was going to say, while we're talking about symmetry, the other thing is that the kind of the ending of this to seem like a nice mirror to 155, where in 155 they are essentially shuttering the pits, and here in this conclusion they are sort of reinstating the original pits in Fort Wadsworth with a full complement of Joes and that excitement of, let's look forward to the future and working together, as opposed to that sad ending of let's shut her up.
Yes, Larry Hama ends his G.I. Joe by stopping G.I. Joe, and Mark Powers ends his G.I. Joe by restarting, by expanding G.I. Joe. I noted that on page 6 and 7 of issue 33, part 9, Della Eden is trying to blast Storm Shadow, and she's using an energy weapon. She's not using a machine gun. Both in the sort of red blasts that it fires, but also when Storm Shadow cuts it in half, it's got all these blue sparks. And I thought, oh, well, that's because they've got all these beefed up Mars weapons, I guess. But I also can't help but wonder if some of the Hasbro, fewer guns directives filters down, and Devil's Due ends up sort of changing scenes as they go. Like, well, we'll just make this scene a laser and not a machine gun. Okay, so Mike Baer's art in most of this final third of World War III is, as you said in our previous Disavowed episode, there's less information in his art. It looks like he is drawing a lot faster or has a lot less time to work on each page. And I made the comment that I still think of him as a talented, sort of worthy G.I. Joe artist, because it takes a really good and smart artist to, when they have less time, to put in the most important information and to strip out the sort of bells and whistles or the extra details. And I do see that in all of the Mike Baer pages in the sort of second half of World War III, which don't measure up to his pages in the first half of World War III. And I realized that there's a sort of 2021, 2023 comparison, and that's Phil Noto, who does a bunch of Star Wars covers for Marvel and has done all sorts of things for Marvel, drew a Black Widow series. He drew a Cable monthly at the beginning of the Krakoa era of X-Men comics, which started in 2020. And when the pandemic hit, there was a big X-Men crossover, and some of the artists were in Italy, where the pandemic was really bad, and editorial had to shuffle some things around. And Phil Noto ended up drawing a couple additional X-Men comics besides his Cable run during that crossover. And then, 3 years later, he did it again. He did some issues of X-Men after Hickman was writing it, when Gary Dugan was writing it. And there is a difference between Phil Noto's Black Widow, where he has what I think is a normal amount of time to draw a page, and he's penciling and inking and coloring, and his fill-in issues of X-Men in the Krakoa era. And you can see that he's putting in a lot less information. And maybe there's less sort of excitement to the, yelling and punching and swinging and blasting and jumping and kicking, the action stuff, right? He's not the first person I think of for physical fight action. But in the same way that Noto understands what is the minimum he has to put into a page to be sort of exciting and clear, in 2020, I see that happening in these Mike Baer pages. And so I am disappointed that the second half of World War III has 3 artists, and I was really grumpy about this when I flipped through these comics at my friend's place back in 2007 and said, yep, I don't want to read this story. I'm glad Devil's Due is over. Take that, Devil's Due. At the same time, I do think that these artists do a good job during what had to be some difficult times, drawing a very complicated story in what we have described many times as a very complicated book.
And some of these pages certainly look a lot more finished like looking at page 2 of issue 35 in the snow. That looks a lot closer to his more polished work. He's doing things like playing around with line weights, and it looks a lot more finished and a lot less sketchy. And for example, one of the very last pages he does on issue 36, when they're all punching the air and saying "Yo Joe," that in places almost looks like it's inked. It's got a much higher level of sheen than some of the other pages.
Yeah, there's a double page spread about halfway into 36, the final chapter, which is Mike Bair, and I had 3 thoughts on this. One, I don't think Bair had the normal amount of time to draw these 2 pages because, there's some details left out of a lot of characters. They look a little bit like mannequins. This is not Joe Kubert clothespin people. This is not that. This is 3 steps up from it. But this doesn't look like, the pages in his first issue. And then I thought, but it's still really fun. And I think I can tell just about who everyone is here. And then I can just sort of get lost in it because we get to see sort of all the Joes we've been following in the main team and all of the plague, and plus some vehicles and their sound effects. And, I've talked before about how sometimes comics in the last, 30 years don't want to use sound effects because maybe people think that it's childish. And then I realized that Beaulieu is doing really nice color work here, that this double page spread is not overwhelming. It's not like too dark in some areas and too shiny in other areas. The explosions are really nice. I love the color work he does with that fire and his explosion. And then I realized I don't think we have ever seen a 2-page spread like this in a G.I. Joe comic. And then I thought, the last 3 times I have said to Mark on this podcast, this is the first time we've ever seen something in a G.I. Joe comic. Mark then finds 4 examples, right? Like thought balloons or something. So maybe I should say we've probably almost never seen a double page splash like this in a G.I. Joe comic, but I certainly can't think of any. And considering how many characters there are, and again, this sort of idea of like a kid with all of the toys on hands and knees on the, on the floor in the room, bashing, playing a big battle. You don't get a shot like this in any of the cartoons. So that's fun.
So we also sort of reading through these issues, there was a few sort of payoffs to discussion points that we'd talked about as well, which was fun to see how those paid off versus our discussion about what we thought some of these things might be. So one of them was last time there was a bit of a moment where Major Blood, someone gets his attention and he's like, oh, this should be interesting, or something along those lines. So we get, and I wondered whether it was Billy turning himself into Major Blood. And we find out that this was Zartan finding him. And I think the implication is that he's paid off Major Blood to let him sort of replace him or sneak in.
So the idea here is that Blood is a mercenary. He'll do jobs for hire. He'll take money. But also, is he a little wary back in issue 32 that Cobra Commander is going too far with the story, in the same way that we see Tolmax a little wary in these 4 issues? Is that what makes this sort of possible?
Yeah, perhaps. It doesn't necessarily seem that it's all sitting that comfortably with him.
Okay.
Another one was this mystery of who is that Cobra trooper, the Viper in the blue that helped Storm Shadow and then helps Barrel Roll steal that what's it called, Night Raven.
So we've got 2 Joes in disguise in this story.
Yeah.
And we've got a Cobra in disguise in this story. Briefly, Zartan pretends to be Blood.
Mm-hmm.
There's a Cobra soldier who for a couple issues we haven't known, and that's Recondo.
Yep.
And then there's a Stratoviper who has been barrel roll.
Yep.
Okay.
And I just want to let the record reflect that I did speculate that trooper might be Recondo, and you poo-pooed that idea a little bit, Tim. So I think I'm vindicated.
Remind me, back in that special missions, and that there's that little bit of America's Elite referring to what happened in special missions. Did we see Blood seemingly kill Recondo, or does Blood just brag about it?
So Blood's had this battle with Recondo, I think pushed him off a waterfall, and Blood thought that he had killed Recondo, and so did everyone else, but Recondo sent Sparks a message saying that he was going to kind of act, as their secret weapon by pretending to be dead, that he can be there in the background and perhaps help in a way that he wouldn't be able to do if they knew that he was alive.
Sparks, good buddy. If we get through this and we're reunited, we're going to read some books by a fireplace.
Oh, and we also talked about Delta's flashbacks and where they might be leading.
Yeah, so issue 35, chapter 11, starts with a flashback. And I can't really tell who it is, but he says Delta out. So I thought, okay, this is Delta. And once again, this story, like every 3 panels, there's a word floating on the top left that says where you are, like Uganda, Australia, London. I could really use for these 2 or 3 flashbacks with Delta, a couple of words, like some years ago. And the color's doing some of the work, but, there are 3 different artists drawing this book. And, everyone draws Delta a little differently. And also, now and many years ago, he has different hair. So I appreciate this flashback of him in the phone booth, but I don't know who he's talking to. And I don't know if that person is important.
Flag. I can't do this anymore, Flag.
No. When he gets out of the phone booth.
Oh, right. This is this other guy, Thomas, that he's sort of shared all of these flashbacks with. So he's sort of, I don't know, trying to escape from something in the earlier flashback with him. Here they're kind of spending a bit more time together. And
Are you sure this is Thomas outside the phone booth?
Yeah,
he's got a mustache.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Does he have a mustache in the other one?
He's got a mustache in the other one as well, hasn't he?
Okay, is that one's in 36, right? The final one's in 36.
And then there's a final one. Yeah.
Okay, because he's coming out of it, and Duke's saying, "I need you here." Right. Okay. So, but in the 2-page flashback, that's a few pages into 36, Rourke has blonde hair.
Yeah, he has blonde hair in all of these flashbacks for some reason, which is confusing.
So,
wait, which one are you talking about now? You're not talking about the first 2 pages.
No,
talk about
turn a couple more pages.
Yeah.
It's when
he shoots his friend. Yeah.
In the Cobra camp, they're all encouraging him to hand him a pistol.
It's not helpful. I think that Rourke looks so different in the flashbacks versus in the present day. That he has blonde hair in the flashbacks and dark hair in the present day. There isn't a huge amount that indicates to you that this is the same person. So I think that hair color difference just doesn't help the reader sort of tracking it. Particularly, you're dealing with 2 different artists a lot of the time, and the character looking very different present day versus in the flashback. Yeah.
And then there's this 2-page flashback which starts the beginning of issue 36, and it starts in front of a car dealership, and someone's in a car, and they're listening to the radio, and then they are crossing the street because they've gotten out of the car, or they are now driving and someone crosses the street in front of them. And there's this very unclear argument, and someone, I guess, strangles someone in an alley, and then it rains, and there's a close-up on some eyes. And from context, I can understand what's happening here because I've read a lot of G.I. Joe comics. Cobra Commander in the Larry Hama origin, way back in Marvel, is a used car salesman, a disaffected American who becomes a domestic terrorist. And so if we see a car dealership in a flashback in G.I. Joe, I know that this is probably about Cobra Commander. This is not like Rock and Roll and Clutch buying a Camaro. But the guys in silhouette, right? And I understand that we're not supposed to see what Cobra Commander looks like. That in those flashbacks in the Marvel run, he's already got his hood. And, Larry Hama has this device in his G.I. Joe stories back then, in the 80s, and also in 2024, where if Cobra Commander wants to take his mask off, he puts on his like beret and his John Lennon glasses, and we think a fake mustache and goatee, but we're not quite sure anymore. And Devils do when they show up Cobra Commander, even on the final page or the final 2 pages of America's Elite 36, their final G.I. Joe comic. Cobra Commander is just a guy with brown hair and his face is in shadow. So I understand what they're trying to do here with this scene, that if you show someone at a car dealership in a flashback in a G.I. Joe comic, and again, it doesn't say it's a flashback, but the colors, I think, suggest it. If someone's all in silhouette, that's probably Cobra Commander. But I don't think the art and the storytelling and the writing are converging in a helpful way. So I think someone sort of jaywalks in front of the car and it's some jerk on a phone. And I think Cobra Commander gets out of the car and then kills the guy. And I think the idea is this is the moment when Cobra Commander first kills someone and loses it. That he's overwhelmed by the little bits of news he's hearing on the radio, and there's actually blood on his hands in that third to last panel in this scene.
And this is what sets him on the path.
Right. I don't think this works. I think if you work really hard and you've read G.I. Joe comics, this works. But if I handed this to a really lapsed G.I. Joe fan or a non-G.I. Joe fan, but someone who reads a lot of comics, they're not going to be able to follow this scene. And yes, at the end of this, you see a close-up on eyes, and then you turn the page, and there's a close-up on eyes, and it's Cobra Commander looking through his blue hood. So I understand that visual. It's the same guy, but now, right? Like movies have done this, and comics have sort of taken it on. So it's like 70% of the way there, and I thought, when I started reading the story, oh, good. This flashback, I thought, oh good, another Rourke flashback. But no, there's a Rourke flashback later. This is a Cobra Commander flashback. And I think this does add something to Cobra Commander's extremism in this story, because at the end of 35, he says to Tomax, he says, "However, my dear Tomax, only God decrees when this conflict ends." And I thought, I don't know about Cobra Commander talking about God, but okay, he's gone really, really far here. So let's...
Well, he's saying that he's God as well. Once I was once I was nothing, an object of scorn and failure. Today I was God. So he's implying that only he, God, can decree when the conflict ends.
Okay, good. Thank you. I take that back. But so I do think narratively a flashback for Cobra Commander is a great idea. I don't think this 12-part story with 1.5 of the issues being double-sized can actually bear a Cobra Commander flashback when Rourke narratively demands flashbacks, and these flashbacks aren't sort of better presented and set off as different. So,
yeah, I think maybe Rourke's backstory is possibly the biggest misstep of this 12-part. I don't think necessarily the flashback story itself is necessarily particularly exciting, but if he had just looked closer to being the present day Rourke, that would have gone a long way to making it less of a confusing experience for the reader.
Yeah. I mean, like Mission Impossible movies, someone's doing something and then they pull off their mask and it's actually Ethan Hunt, it's actually Tom Cruise, and that's fun. But man, when I read a Batman comic or watch an episode and Bruce Wayne is like, I have to go undercover as Matches Malone, and he like puts on a wig where he has like blonde hair or something. Like narratively, that's fun. Visually, that's no fun. Like in Batman stories, I want to see Bruce Wayne or I want to see Batman. I don't want to see Batman take his costume off and, like put on a wig. Also, the stuff with Rourke starts to fizzle because
there's less space for it, isn't it? There's all of this other stuff that has to be achieved.
Yeah, because Duke going back and forth with him, like, I don't trust you, or you should start trusting me now, or oh man, I'm worried about America. We're back in America, or can I trust you, or give me a gun, or I need you here now. We're getting shot up, and then finally, Rourke, you're a Joe, and you were always gonna be a Joe. Like I did want to get there. I don't think it's quite earned.
Forget the past, you're one of us now. Here, see? Like you always meant to be. Today's the day that Cobra goes down once and for all.
Yeah, and that's fun, but for someone to really be a G.I. Joe for me, because I have been buying into an intellectual property for 40 years.
25 years.
I need a code name and a costume. And Rourke is just a guy.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't need Recondo to get out of his Cobra disguise and put on his, original costume in this story. I wouldn't mind, but there actually is no space for that. Like, that's okay.
And the other thing is, did they kind of basically forget about Rourke after that point? Rourke doesn't feature quite as much in the sort of second half of issue 36, that he's got a moment where he's sort of talking down this new Plague member who had sort of, joined because, he had felt betrayed and his brother had been let down, all this kind of thing. And so he's, I guess sees himself in him. So kind of talks him down, but we don't really see him again in the rest of the issue after that. And curiously, he's not on that page with the final page with the Joes pumping their fists in the air. So
the 2-page spread.
Yeah. So he's not necessarily, there's not necessarily that full resolution that he definitely is a Joe at the end of this.
And we don't check in with him in the 3-page montage of 6 panel grids where every panel we're cutting to a different location, where we see, the Joes on the flag, we see Ray, we see the ninjas in Beijing, we see Falcon and Dana. What's Dana's name?
Volga.
So, yes, Rourke disappears from this issue.
Well, perhaps this is perhaps he's on that Appalachia panel.
Where are you?
So it's the panel next to the one with Falcon and Dana that you just called out.
Oh, he's putting his hand on that Plague guy's shoulder.
Yeah, Vanguard, Lieutenant Nick Bailey. I think that's him putting his hand on his shoulder.
Okay, all right, so he's talked him down. So don't be a bad guy anymore. Come in, right? Mm-hmm. Just as a visual cue, I wish Vanguard here had those night vision goggles. Also, I'm not sure who the 2 guys are behind him. Okay, so I've been picking on some things. There's a really fun moment of brand. What do you call it? In 1991, Hawk gets his 3rd action figure, and he's got this sort of superhero like headband thing and a helmet and a jetpack, and his colors and his hair match his version 2, right? His 1986 figure. He's got brown hair and he's in green and brown. But now he's flying a jetpack. And, the line is getting a lot more fantastic in 89, 90, 91. And that version of Hawk shows up in the Deke episodes. And I think he shows up in some Andrew Wildman issues, but I actually can't sort of picture any at the moment. But this is not something that G.I. Joe overall has pushed a lot, because 1 year later, in 92, he gets another new action figure, which is much more like his 1986 version, a jacket with pants, and now he comes with a backpack that makes noises. And from the first Deke season to the second Deke season, they drop the jetpack thing so that he can be in the talking battle commander's costume design. And I've always liked the idea that, I mean, any Joe can use a jetpack, because as a kid, you can plug that jetpack into any Joe's backpack, even if in the animation, a couple of them seem to use it more than others. Duke at the beginning of the movie, Stalker in some of the early episodes, Starduster, and who actually comes with the original jump? Is that
That was Grand Slam, wasn't it?
Grand Slam, thank you.
The Silver Pad's Grand Slam, I think.
Yes. But besides Starduster and Grand Slam, who's the other Joe who comes with a jetpack? 91 Hawk. And so I love the idea here, whether it is a seed planted that one of the Plague members has a jetpack, so that later when he gets killed and Hawk finds it, Hawk can have a jetpack. And, you know, there's no big reason for the Devil's Due comics in 2007 to refer to a 1991 Hawk figure, because, you know, by then Hawk's gotten a couple more figures and they're not doing the jetpack thing anymore. But I've always loved it when, and it doesn't happen very often, when a Joe in story somehow refers to sort of their like second or third version of their costume. You know, like in all the new comics, Stalker's back in his normal greens, but I would love it if he just wears a white winter coat once or gets in a kayak, because that second Stalker toy design is so cool, even if we want him to be in his 82, 83 costume, right? We don't want him to be a tundra warrior. So this is a fun bit of, you know, toy referencing here without hitting it on the head, but it also, much more importantly, narratively, lets Hawk very dramatically take down Cobra Commander and transcend his wheelchair. That he's not land bound, right? And there's it's set up earlier when the rest of the team leaves him in the car, and Scarlet says, "We need you to hold the line here." I think it's Scarlet. And he feels a little sorry for himself, or he's starting to sort of, the gears are turning. And then it's a little unclear when he sees that jetpack, right, on top of a crumpled up dead guy.
Yep.
And I thought, what is that? And then I thought, oh, awesome.
Yeah, you kind of blink and you miss it and not quite get it, but you know, it's one of those things where maybe you don't quite realize the significance of the time at the time, and then you can flick back a few pages and go, oh right, aha, I see.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the death of Billy. Many years later, in A Real American Hero at IDW, Larry Hama would kill Billy and would have Cobra Commander not express much emotion over it. This here in World War III is particularly cruel and moving, and it sets up, you know, Cobra Commander has this line that he doesn't feel anything for him anymore, and he's also given him one last chance. And
yeah, let's call it out, because it's a good line.
Sure,
you know that he's basically asks Billy as he's dying. He says, "Why? You could have killed me before." And he says, "In my hands, I hold the fates of every man, woman, and child on the planet. I am the master of all I survey. But I had to know, am I my own master? I had to be certain I am not the man I used to be. I loved you once. Now I feel nothing. My victory is complete." Chilling.
Yeah.
And then the next issue opens with Blood's reaction, seeing him strung up, and we don't see Billy, or we see hints of a silhouette of, you know, where Billy is, sort of, you know, via seeing Blood looking up and his expression.
So these two Crimson Guardsmen don't know who that is, and they just assume it's some person or some troublemaker. And Blood is really stunned that Cobra Commander would kill even his son and then do this, string him up. And so two things are happening here. One, I think this is setting up where Blood might be amenable to Zartan to pay him to maybe undo Cobra Commander's mad scheme. also, as I said, this wraps up the whole Billy arc from his first appearance and Major Blood and the Baroness trying to get him to assassinate Cobra Commander back in the 30s at Marvel, to him becoming a ninja, to him, you know, I mean, he even got his own profile in issue 115 or so.
Yeah, and maybe Blood here. Some of that expression on his face is partly a recognition of responsibility of that he's set him on this path.
The other thing that jumps out at me here on this second page of issue 34 is it's clear from reading it with the dialogue, but visually it is not clear that Billy is strung up. There's a silhouette of, I think, a head and a little bit of shoulders on the top left of the first panel. And then in the third panel, you see some flagpole. I'm going to guess here that this was drawn a certain way, and an editor said, "Oh, Hasbro's not going to like this. Like, make it less direct." Or Hasbro said, "We don't like this. Make it less direct." Like, don't actually show someone strung up. It's too awful, or it's too charged.
But you know, also what you can conjure up in your own mind.
That's true.
Can be more effective sometimes. I believe that Mike, when we spoke to Mike O'Sullivan, he mentioned this as a point that he was, one of the things he was proudest of in this story was the way that they dealt with this scene.
I still think that scene is really kind of horribly awful, wonderful, that you don't ever see him. You just see people's reaction to his killing. I still think that was a pretty good choice on Mark's part.
And, you know, it sort of, just looking at this page again, sort of looks great. And sort of Mark Shoyket, I think it is, isn't it? Sort of his art seems to evolve and improve over the course of just these few issues, and combined with the colours, it, you know, looks really quite handsome a lot of the time. And the colours, particularly over this artist, reminds me a little bit of the watercolour stylings of the 2000 AD artist Peter Doherty, who did a lot of colouring on Jeff Darrow for Shaolin Cowboy, who's got a great use of colour. So it's just another way of saying colour looks great.
In issue 34, the Joes split into 3 teams and go to 3 geographic locations around the world.
They're collecting crystals.
And I thought, hey, like the 4 miniseries, like the 4 miniseries that kick off each year of G.I.Joe animation, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86. And actually Operation Dragonfire, for that matter, although that one is not the full team breaking into smaller groups. That's just Slaughter's Marauders and that new guy. But the later Devil's Due G.I. Joe comics feel much less like they're trying to incorporate the animation, whereas the first, 2 years by Josh Blaylock, it really felt like, this is 85% continued Marvel Larry Hama continuity and 15% sort of what works from the cartoon. And I don't think this is a reference to the cartoon here in part 10, having the team split up, but it is certainly a thing that the animation kept doing and was a lot of fun and was a way for, writers Ron Friedman and Buzz Dixon and Doug Booth to handle so many characters, so many toys across, a couple episodes. So the Baroness says, get ready, everyone. I've got a surprise. And I thought, oh. So Baroness says, after Mars, where goes Mars, there goes Athena. Because someone says, oh, aren't you worried? Because Destro and Mars, and it's such a cluster F. And Baroness says, I've got something up my sleeve. And I thought, on the one hand, cool. I think Baroness actually is, resourceful enough that she would do something like this. And also, just from a naming perspective, that's fun and cool. That Destro has Mars and Baroness has Athena, whatever it is. And there is an episode of the cartoon, Spell of the Siren, where the Baroness specifically says, I can't trust men, so I'm going to put all the men on Joe and Cobra under my spell, and I'm just going to work with a couple women Cobra soldiers and officers, which introduces women Cobra soldiers and officers. And I haven't seen Ode to Cobra in a long time. The episode that I think is about perfume. I think that might also have a sort of Baroness asserting herself thread. But anyway, I like this. At the same time, I don't want to be too spoilery about a late Star Wars movie, but there's a late Star Wars movie where a villain says, I have a bunch of spaceships that you've never known about, and I've been hiding them. And we don't have a lot of spaceships right now, but hey, did you know that I have like thousands and thousands of spaceships, and we can stop the good guys? And it feels, it's like a Deus Ex Machina where the threat has been almost neutralized, and then someone can sort of pull a rabbit out of a hat and say, no, I have an army. I have an army, and so we can take back London with my army that you've never, ever known about or seen about. And so I'm a little torn with the Athena stuff, particularly since they only get like 2 panels and then maybe the background of a couple more panels. So,
although also here's a devil's advocate position that Destro never had the Iron Grenadier army until suddenly he did. Although I think it kind of felt a little bit more organic to the story, in keeping with his character and less out of the blue.
Yeah, so this is a retcon. It's clever. It also is a stretch. Also, because she says Athena, and Athena's a lady, and Mars is a man, and because I'm thinking of that episode Spell of the Siren, where Baroness uses only lady Cobra soldiers, I thought, oh, well, all the Iron Grenadiers are guys. Are all the Athena troopers going to be women? And then they're not. Oh. And so I was slightly confused by this Deus Ex Machina because of my own predisposition to, the notion. So do you have any thoughts on, any additional thoughts on Baroness and Athena?
Yeah, like an army probably would come in handy if you're trying to track down Cobra Commander and your kidnapped son, for example, right? If you've said it there, that's... But yeah, I mean, sort of, as we've been talking, I've been sort of flicking through the issues and stuff, and we could, you could quite easily devote an entire 2-hour episode to any one of these issues in themselves. There, a lot going on. They look, they're very well executed, and there's a lot of action and great looking art across the patch. I wanted to return to kind of an idea that we mentioned last time, which is that it's easier to kind of have a blitzkrieg attack and sort of seize power than it is to hold on to it, and that very much is the case here. That things definitely sort of seem to be falling apart quite quickly, and you've kind of got those plague troopers on their own in I think a couple of the cities where sort of the locals are sort of beginning that fight back. And I looked up another statistic. You've got 34,000 police just in the NYPD. So the numbers that would take to hold on to a location like this are definitely not in Cobra's or any invading forces' favor. Dogs, honestly. Right, I need to take them for a walk soon.
Sure. I'm just about done, actually, with my comments.
We talked a lot about various I Spies and things, and a lot of those, we were talking about less Easter eggs and more just sort of like, I guess, exploring the grand sweep of everything that's going on. There was a couple of things that were closer to kind of Easter eggs that I wanted to call out. Again, something we talked about before, Cutter is shown to be in Boston here, providing humanitarian assistance. So the wish that you asked for last episode was granted.
Yeah.
Ding, ding, ding. And we see a first appearance of Carla Doc Greer, which is the original Doc's niece, with Lifeline in Toronto.
Wait, when you say first appearance, I'm momentarily confused on the timeline of this character. She's sort of an IDW character, right? But based on some Ron Rudat artwork that was pitched but never followed up on at Hasbro, right? Yeah, there's some Ron Rudat art from the 80s, which made it to that 30th Salute trading card set. There's an image of it at yojo.com in the unproduced section.
Okay, you might know better than than me on that one. I don't know the full origins.
Yeah, I think that's it. I apologize to all of the Joe fans.
So I'm looking up on the G.I. Joe wiki. Carla Greer appears as a member of the cast of G.I. Joe Reloaded as a reimagined version. So that might be actually her first appearance. And then is a toy in 2016 is the first appearance of the Carla Greer toy, which I guess is some years after this. And then she, I think she does appear in the IDW continuity as well.
Error detected. Error detected. No prize incoming.
I had one error detected.
Okay.
Which is that in issue 35, G.I. Jane is on the mission, and when we switch artists, it looks like the character changes from being G.I. Jane to Bomb Strike.
I think Mike Bair can draw a woman in her 50s or 60s, and I think when the artist changes, I think that sort of gets dropped, and she's just a woman who's got shorter blonde hair and then has put on a G.I. Joe t-shirt.
Yeah, it's. I think it's the fact that she looks younger here, with that kind of light brown t-shirt with the G.I. Joe logo on it is the kind of the actual outfit of Bomb Strike. So, but I think the character in that scene is meant to be G.I. Jane, because I believe that they are, part of that same group.
Yes, I had that same reaction. There's a reference I wanted to call out on page 16 of the final issue. We have 2 pages of 6-panel grids checking in different locations in each one as the Joes are battling and mopping up Cobra as the tide has been turned. And so in that first panel on page 15, who is that standing behind Psych Out?
I think that's a random general.
Okay. So he's narrating this sequence, and he's sort of building up to this affirmation that, we're going to stop them. We're going to take all of our advantages. I want updates every hour, no matter what the trouble is. And then the final panel, it doesn't have a geographic location call out. And he says, G.I. Joe is there. And that final panel is Grunt standing in the 1982 G.I. Joe Herb Trimpe Grunt corner box Marvel Comics pose with one fist and arm up in the air, running, lunging, and with a machine gun in the other hand, surrounded by reddish, yellow, brown, ground and explosions, which lightly recalls, all the package art where Joes are in front of explosions. And so there's this convergence here with this speech by this general at the Pentagon to Psych Out and to everyone and to us, which is he's building up to saying a G.I. Joe slogan, right? And he's not singing it, but he's basically saying, G.I. Joe is there. And then the comic makes this comic reference, this Herb Trimpe 1982 Marvel reference. So there's this convergence of, the theme song and the jingle, which is from the toy ads and the cartoon, but also the older comic, and also just sort of all iconic imagery of G.I. Joe characters from the first year, like in front of explosions. And also, we haven't seen Grunt in any of these sort of 1-panel, 2-panel check-ins all the way around the globe. And Grunt retires from the Joes, right? During the Hama Marvel run. And then he goes to grad school, right? We see him one more time later on. And then in the IDW run, he gets kidnapped, right? Grunt is Robert Graves, right?
Yeah. And he's in G.I. Joe, The Enemy, as one of the main characters in that.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good.
Right, yes, in The Enemy, that focuses on this parallel story of Grunt and this other unnamed Cobra. And towards the end of that story, Duke, I think it is, saying, "Gotta say, Grunt, when we put out the call for Joes to rejoin the team, I didn't think you'd show up. Heard you were a family man now. I am, Duke. That's why I'm here, to protect my little girl." So, I guess in theory, he's meant to be part of the Joes.
Okay. I mean, he's certainly in that list of every Joe from a couple issues earlier.
Yeah, I don't know where he was on the map.
It's Joe-age time.
Shall we rate this one? This is tricky. There's different things going on, isn't there? There's the sweep of the story, the ambition, the sort of the large degree of success that they had there. The art is a mix of different artists, which generally is a detractor, but the team have done well, and a lot of the art is very handsome. The storytelling is clear. The ambition of the story is really good. It does feel slightly condensed towards the back end of things, and that's no fault of the creators. They had to deal with the hand that they had, and they only had 12 issues to wrap up this thing. So very I think it is across the sweep of the 12 issues, I think the World War III rightfully kind of it lives up to the praise that it receives, in terms of the scale of the story and the success in which it's delivered. I think it's a great high point for the Devil's Due era to go out on, and these 4 issues again very good overall. I'm going to go in with an 8, I think.
There are a lot of things that are great and right about this. One color artist for all 12 chapters, and he's really good. Not just okay, he's really good. And some Devil's Due comics have had color that I quite dislike. This story manages to include not dozens, but hundreds of characters. It introduces some new ones. It has all of these resolutions. The actual ending is great. What happens with Hawk, what happens with Colton, what happens with the president, what happens with Destro, what happens with Cobra Commander, the final word from Cobra Commander, the Joes getting, reinstated. I gotta say, I don't love it when the Joes in the comics say "Yo Joe." To me, that really belongs to the cartoon. That's a fun, silly kid thing for the cartoon. And I know that in the real military, some people say "oorah," and I think once or twice in the comics more recently that Joes have said that. But anyway, I like the final spread at the end of this end chapter where the Joes are celebrating. But it's like, no, that's not what you say. It's like, don't say that. Don't say knowing is half the battle. Okay, so because this story has such a big canvas, and it is successful in almost every way, narratively, in terms of story, because there's a Michael Golden cover, and a good one, right? It's not just, one character with no background. And because it's 12 chapters, right? I mean, how often in comics has a really big story sort of gotten enough chapters as opposed to not enough chapters, or a story that goes on way too long and you think, man, they should have done this in fewer chapters.
And beyond that, have a satisfying ending. It's really difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, you think about G.I. Joe endings, the ending to the movie, the ending to the Marvel run, the ending to the IDW run. I've not ever read the final issue of Reloaded, and we have not read Reloaded yet for Talking Joe. I think at the time I did read the first 5 or 6. So I can only compare this to a couple endings for G.I. Joe, and as you said before, this is almost the opposite of 155. This is a big, great ending for G.I. Joe, and this is I don't know that this is the ending I've always wanted, but this is certainly one of the endings I would always want. Cobra's defeated, but also, some of them got away, or there's still some threats. In some ways, another comparison is the end of Rise of Cobra, the first live action film, where, Cobra Commander and Destro are both captured. But because the flashbacks could be clearer, because the art is inconsistent and at times rushed, although all of it is capable and some of it is good, this loses some points. So I'm going to give this a 6, which feels sort of low and harsh. I think I'm also taking 1 point off of the last 4 chapters. But that is to say, I still really like this. And as I said at the beginning of this episode, I've what a journey I have been on, sort of getting to know the Devil's Due continuity and appreciating all the hard work that went into it, where at the time I was just really grumpy and I couldn't deal. And when it's not the only G.I. Joe that I get, there's a lot more G.I. Joe before and after from other people, and there's a lot of good G.I. Joe before and after from other people. Sort of the stakes were really high for Devil's Due, because at the time I had no sense that the toys would get bigger and better, and there'd be new animation, and there'd be live action films, and Larry Hama would come back, and then there'd be this other continuity, right? All I had at Devil's Due was their sort of rough start, and then when they did try another continuity, Reloaded, it didn't last. And my recollection of it is that the things that made it different at the beginning were very quickly it just looked like another G.I. Joe. And so, though my 6 is low, I just want to tip my hats to the people who made these 4 issues under certainly challenging circumstances. Sort of emotionally, it's a 7, but sort of factually, it's a 6, right? If there'd been one artist all the way through, or if the artists had been able to be sort of more consistent, fewer rushed pages, no rushed pages, or like rather than someone doing some pages and then some pages and some pages, they just get a whole issue to themselves. And then so a 6. But the last thing that I'll say is, at the end of these issues, there are ads for the Storm Shadow collection, the World War III Omnibus, and so it's sad that it's over for Devil's Due. But there are also ads for Drafted, also written by Mark Powers, which I know that Josh Blaylock is a big fan of, and Spooks, the second Spooks series, and Voltron, drawn by Mike Baer, actually. And so, even though the story of Devil's Due constricts immediately after G.I. Joe, Devil's Due does continue. And so just as Hawk and Colton and the Joes look ahead, and the Baroness looks ahead to what might be out there after reading these issues, I'm not reading the graphic novel collections, Blaylock went on to interesting things, Tim Seeley went on to interesting things, Mike Baer went on to interesting things, and so I just appreciate it, this story and its bigness and its ending.
Very good. Okay, so next time on Talking Joe Disavowed, ... well, we've got to the end of America's Elite and the end of the Devil's Due era, but for Talking Joe, we've got a few gaps in our coverage of this era. So we've got the Dreamwave Transformers versus G.I. Joe series, the G.I. Joe Declassified series by Larry Hama, G.I. Joe Reloaded, and the Storm Shadow series that we've not covered. So
Sigma 6?
Well, we've not covered it, but I'm at peace with that.
I mean, it is G.I. Joe comics. It could be a short episode.
Maybe even Sigma 6, to scratch that comprehensive itch. And of course, there is some Devil's Due creatives that we've not yet spoken to as well. So hopefully that will follow. So not quite at the end of our disavowed journey overall. And of course, there's also another series coming called The Disavowed by a certain someone called Josh Blaylock, touted as The Boys meets G.I. Joe. When we're not talking about all things disavowed, in our other shows, we are covering A Real American Hero and the Energon G.I. Joe books from Skybound as they come out. So look for us there. You can find us in the usual places. talkingjoe.co.uk is the website that links to those places. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. It also has links to Patreon. Patreon.com/talkingjoe is the website that will be taken to you when you click that button. People like our backers, Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, Rob, Shane, Ryan, Simon, Chris, Joe, Craig, Frank, and our latest member, Mike, are getting early access to episodes as well as some exclusive content. They will have got early access to all of these latest set of Disavowed episodes before everyone else did by some considerable margin. So they're they're stealing the march on comics that are 20 years old. So that's great. So, Tim, where can people find you when you are not talking to me about the end of publishing eras of G.I. Joe?
With my creative partners, we make video essays on television and film, which are at atomicabe.com. I own and operate a brick-and-mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts, which miraculously missed the nuclear strike at the beginning of World War III. Blackout is a terrible shot. That's Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at my blog, arealamericanbook.com.
Very good. So I think that is us done. But until next time, remember that...
Nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast!
Laters.